Good afternoon. Thank you for being here. I'm Lara Downs, and this is a panel on building your brand. I am a pianist, and I was a laureate. I am a laureate of the Sphinx Medal of Excellence from last year, which was a tremendous honor and a privilege. I just wanted to start off by saying yesterday I was at the classical radio station here doing an interview, and he asked about this panel today, and I said, yeah, we're talking about building your brand. He said, that sounds really complicated. And I said, no, not at all. It's just a question of knowing who you are and telling other people about it. And he said, yeah, that sounds really complicated. And it is. It's a big question. And I think we have a lot to talk about today. We all represent very different aspects of the musical profession. We're at different stages in our careers, and so I think we all have really different perspectives on what it is to build a career and build a brand. Some of us have just graduated from school in May, not me, I won't say who. But I would like to start by just asking each of the panelists to introduce themselves very briefly.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Drew Alexander Forde. I just graduated with my master's, and I am now currently creating and building my career using social media platforms, showing that classical music is not just for rich old white people.
Hi, everyone. My name is Allison Loggins-Hull. I am a flutist, a composer. I teach at the Music Advancement Program at the Juilliard School, and I am one of the co-founders of Flutronix, which is an ensemble consisting of myself, another flutist, a drummer. We use vocals, we use electronics, and it's a project that I've been involved in for almost 8 years now.
I'm Jannina Norpoth. I'm a violinist. I was involved in the very first Sphinx competition, and I'm a Detroit native, so it's really exciting to be here as part of all of this and what Sphinx has grown into. I play in 2 ensembles, one called PUBLIQuartet, which is a string quartet that does primarily new music, improvisation, and group composition. I also play in a rock band called HOLLANDS, and I'm very passionate about expanding what people think of when they think of the violin and what kind of music is associated with that, and sounds, and the vision of that instrument.
Thank you. So we're each going to take a few minutes and just talk about how we have developed our brands. And really for the purpose of this conversation, you know, what I said yesterday I think is very much true, that building your brand means knowing who you are. So we really could substitute the word self for brand, and building that, knowing that is a lifelong process of evolution and change and self-knowledge. So I'll just talk a little bit about how this brand, or this me, developed and where it's going. I think that pretty much everything that I've done in my career goes back to my very weird childhood. I was raised in so many ways that were unconventional. Primarily, I think at the heart of everything that I am about learning and doing, I was homeschooled, and I had no idea that there were really very much in the way of structures in the world. My education was very haphazard and very enthusiastic and kind of hit or miss, and sort of anything that we wanted to learn, we could learn, and I still have that belief. In fact, I have 2 kids now, and it wasn't until my second child started kindergarten and I realized that they were doing the same thing that I realized there is such a thing as a curriculum in the world. So I tend to think that anything I want to do or learn, I can do. And so when I look back, the brand that I've built, the self that I've built, really has a lot to do with unawareness of boundaries, which has served me very well. When I first started, I had this kind of last of the dinosaurs story of a real career boost. I had been studying abroad for years. I grew up in California, and then I was in Europe for years studying, and I came to New York. I was very young, and I won a competition, and I had a concert in the small hall at Carnegie, and there was a gentleman there who had a record label who said, I would love to have you make a record for me. I had no idea that this was, you know, such a rare opportunity. I also had no idea that I really should sort of just shut up and do what other people told me to do. So when we started talking about what I wanted to record, I had this idea about a story album. I've always thought of music making in terms of storytelling and theme building. and kind of putting context around the record. This was long enough ago that the answer to that was, well, you can't do that because in the record store there are bins and they have composer names on them, and then there's another bin that says miscellaneous and you don't want to be in that bin. But I prevailed, and I put out a record that had a theme, a story around it, and I have continued to do that all of these years. And I think that my brand, such as it is, has very much to do with communicating about music, storytelling around music. Everything that has built into that, I think, really comes down to allowing myself to know myself and to incorporate things that are of interest to me. So I am a pianist. I'm also a writer. I'm a broadcaster. I am a mentor. I'm a communicator. I'm really passionate about building my audience, and I've realized that there are so many ways to do that. One of the recent examples is that I was writing liner notes for an album a couple of years ago, and the decision was made at the label to actually bring in somebody else to write the notes, but I had started writing these notes, and I had them on my computer, and I sort of started expanding them, and they turned into this very sort of raw autobiographical piece about my life, about all the things I'm talking about, my life and all the, the weirdness of it and everything that has led me on my musical path. And I was kind of shocked by it, and I sent it to a writer friend, and he sent it to an editor, and it ended up being published in a couple of journals. One was a literary journal, one was a music journal, and then a month or two after that, I had an email through my website from Reader's Digest, and they wanted to publish it. And so, all of a sudden, I'm getting emails still now from people who see this essay that's about my music in Reader's Digest, in some dentist's office, I don't know where, and this is a huge expansion, clearly, of my audience. So I've given myself permission, I think, slowly over time, to incorporate all the things that I am passionate about and good at, and that has coalesced into something that's a very unique profile, I think. It has been challenging because during the time that I've been active as a musician, I think there have been biases about, having your hands in too many pots. So I think I had some trepidation about, for example, writing. If I started writing too much, did that mean that I wasn't, being a pianist? Now I've realized that the more I do, the better. And I think that that's true for all of us. And I think that is my brand. The diversity of my reach and of my voice is my brand. I think that the other challenge has been finding people to help me with that. For the longest time, I was doing all these different things, and I was realizing that they had clear connections. And I wasn't finding the support in management and PR to help me tell that story. I kept saying, I know that all these things are connected, but I also feel like I'm just doing all these things. How can we pull them together into a story that makes sense? And I have now found that solution, and it's really liberating and empowering. So I think that we're living in such an interesting time, and I know that we all have things to say about social media and the way that we tell our stories. I think one of the biggest shifts that I've seen also is the end of blah, blah, blah. You used to have to write these long descriptions of what you were doing and press releases and send out these big packets. And now we can tell stories in so many different ways. We can tell stories with an image. I think that since I've become proficient and possibly obsessive with social media, my Instagram tells a really interesting story about me that nothing else does. All these different pieces fit together, and they help to define us. So the other thing that I want to say before we go on is that the brand, the you, develops in tandem with the time in which you live. And I've experienced that full frontal in the last year because I have a project, an album out that is very much connected with our American moment. It's a record of American music that I put together in response to what was happening already 2 years ago, and who knew that we would be where we are now. But it's kind of thrust me into a place where I feel like I am, just an accidental activist. And I've taken that and I've kind of developed it and run with it, and I've realized that my art gives me this really incredible platform to speak about issues that are important, to encourage other people to speak, to encourage dialogue, to be out in the community. I'm, working with young people all around the country. That's folded into who I am. That's really encouraging and exciting. And so, this is an evolution, and I think I know now where my brand, where myself is going for the next period of time, which is really assuming this mantle of the artist as activist and as communicator in a time when that's so needed. So I think that the branding of an individual is, as I said, a lifetime, a career-long journey. It's a really exciting one, and I'm excited to hear what you guys have to say.
Well, I'd love to kind of talk a little bit about branding in terms of marketing, in the marketing sense of the word, and how branding is a practice of creating a name or a symbol or a design that identifies and differentiates yourself or your product from other things out there. So I'd like to kind of talk a little bit about that as it relates to my projects and also, my individual pursuits. So for Flutronix, for example, we spent like a year trying to think about, design, and finalize our logo, the look that we would put out there into the world before we played our first concert. I mean, we're also writing music because there was no music for two flutes and electronics, and we were both like, what are we doing here? But we knew it was very important to have that message solid because our project was so different and so unique, and we didn't want there to be any confusion once we finally did put ourselves out there. So our name itself, Flutronix, it's flutes and electronics. Okay, so we felt like that was pretty safe. That kind of explains a little bit about what's going on. And in this process, we realized it was important to also really demonstrate who we are as individuals, like Lara was saying about representing the self and telling your story and being genuine about that. So we are both people who are very much in love with all sorts of music. We're classically trained. That's our technical foundation. And obviously we have a deep passion and love for classical music, but there are so many other musical forms that we love as much and that we bring into our artistic expression. So we wanted that to be evident as well in everything that we put out there. i.e., it's just a real genuine image of the self. We're not, there's no, you won't find any pictures of us wearing long ball gowns and, like foo-foo, like tiaras or anything, or anything that's more like a more traditional kind of like headshot, for example, for classical flutists, because that's not what we're doing. And it's not totally who we are. It's a little bit of who we are, but it's not the whole picture. So we realized there was a lot of value in being very honest and trying best to accurately represent ourselves and just be like keep it 100 really, So we're both we're very much like colorful people. We love bright bold colors. Where I can be a little loud, but this is true. So we took that on. We let that happen in all the packaging that we've put out there. It is bright. It is colorful. It's fun. Our shows are not your typical, again, like kind of recital experience. We talk with our audience. We banter on stage. We are very much even in the show experience ourselves. So we wanted to convey that as well. Like, what is the experience of Flutronix? Like, what could their music be like? What could their show be like? And I hope and I think we were able to achieve, to demonstrate that it was that kind of more interpersonal concert experience on the fun side, a little bit like you can kick back, you can bop your head, you can dance even at this flute concert. And that, that obviously was very important to us, and being able to feel strong about that messaging before you put yourself out there, I think is very important, because you don't want to be in a place where you're changing your messaging constantly, or double backing. You want to be consistent. So I think it's very important, and I can't really stress this enough, to spend a lot of time thinking about that. And if you do a logo, or you work with somebody on a logo, like, test it out with people, your friends, colleagues, whoever, a stranger, someone you meet here, and just be like, what does this say to you? What do you think about, like, when you see this? And they'll let you know. And as kids are really honest. I have 2 young kids. I ask them things all the time. They're like my editors. They help me. They help me with a lot of things. But then you might hear feedback that you're like, oh, that's not what I was trying to say, or you might get really positive feedback. It's like, yes, that's exactly what I want people to walk away with. So I think that's very important. And I mean, when you think about it, we see branding all the time, all over the place. I mean, when you see a Mercedes, you see the logo, you know what that symbolizes. It's a luxury experience. You go to Starbucks, you see the Little Mermaid in the thing. You're like, I'm gonna get my holiday pumpkin latte, and I know what that's like. I know there's gonna be a line. It's like, what the product is, or like the Apple logo. It's gonna be clean design, efficient, expensive. But the message is clear, and you know what you're getting. So if you can try to develop that same effect with your own messaging, I think that's the way to go, for sure.
Awesome.
Yeah.
It's so interesting. I want to piggyback on what Allison and Lara were saying. I think the most important thing about building your brand is having self-awareness and understanding who you are and what you stand for. And beyond anything, whatever you do, it doesn't matter if you sell reeds, or if you play classical music, or make YouTube video covers, you have to know that whatever you do gives people value. It's not really about you. And I found that personally, whenever I create something, I have to put it through a filter. And when you're building a brand, it's important to have a filter that is both specific but also broad at the same time. And that's probably what makes it really hard. Because when you go through, I went through the end of my undergraduate degree and a graduate degree, and my brand kind of changed drastically over that 4-year period. And so why it needs to be broad is so you can have that leeway. And the way to do this is to create a statement for yourself. A statement that you can say yes or no to whenever you post content, whenever you play a concert, and whenever you interact with people. You have to make sure this filter gives you a clear yes or no. And if the answer is no, you don't do that one thing, or you change an aspect or an attribute of that interaction or that product to make sure that it gets the yes. For example, with my brand, That Viola Kid, I started it on Instagram. And feel free to check out my page as I'm speaking, at That Viola Kid on Instagram, for reference. What was really important to me was making sure, growing up, I didn't have many mentors that looked like me. I didn't have an older brother. I didn't have even any older African-American students that I could really talk to, because a lot of times they were about to graduate. So they were busy with their own stuff. So what I wanted to do was be a big brother, a mentor, a person that somebody can look up to, a younger musician can look up to and can see that I'm struggling too. We're all in the trenches together, and I'm just a little far ahead of you, so let me just pull you along and bring you along with me. So that is my brand. And the question that I ask myself, and you need to find your own question, this is gonna change everything. Would I have liked to have seen this when I was a younger musician? That's it. It's simple, it's specific, but it's also broad. And it ranges from, me having really crazy conversations with my instruments, my inanimate object instruments. It takes me to, if I'm feeling bad, I will talk about it. If I'm frustrated during practice, I will talk about that. And even more so, when I get rejected from a program or a festival, I post that. because I think it's important for people to see that this is not a stream of successes. Like, to be successful, you have to fail a lot, but you have to fail forward. And so that's why I really try to incorporate that into my personal brand. So that's what I stand for. And the way to build your brand is to understand what you stand for and figure out how you can deliver that value to your audience.
I love that, Drew. Fail forward. I think that that's probably some of like the most important advice you can ever have as a musician, is just to fail completely forward and with like great enthusiasm, because I think I've learned the most from all of my failures. But that's getting a bit off topic. Let me start out by saying I just hate the word brand. It sounds like a cattle prong. And all of us as artists, it's restrictive. It feels like I've been doing this my entire life. I don't remember when I didn't play the violin. I've sacrificed so much. I've given my soul to this. And okay, and I have to sum it up in like one logo, or I have to sum it up in one photograph, and that's gonna be like, the thing that grabs the person that's gonna hire me, and then that's, my job depends on it, and my money depends on it, and my reputation depends on it. So I wanna break that down a little bit, just to make it less scary. I think that we have a huge tendency in life, but in the music world specifically, to just want to put things in a very neatly packaged little box. And that's not art. Art doesn't come in a neatly packaged little box. Sometimes pop music comes in a neatly packaged little box, and anything that comes in a neatly packaged little box is probably not really that interesting, although it can be absolutely joyous and fun. I'm thinking about that for a minute. But I think when it comes to music, there's so much more. And for me specifically as a musician, going back to what Lara said, your childhood, my mother, who's right there with the camera in her hand, is a photographer. I call her the mamarazzi because she's always there with the camera. My dad is a jazz musician. He does a lot of avant-garde. He was a big part of the free jazz movement, and huge. I grew up around really strange music, and that's probably really influenced the musician that I've become today. And I was really into it as a child, and then I rebelled, and I was like, I'm going to play classical music. That's my rebellion. I'm going to play the notes that are on the page. I'm going to play the violin, and I got really good at it. So I was like, this is my thing. I'm going to play the violin. And at a certain point, I really burned out on that, and I was like, maybe this is not my thing, but I've spent my whole life doing that thing, and now what? So at a certain point in my mid-20s, I was like, I don't want to do this. And I had, I came back to it, I went forward with it, but my heart wasn't really in it, and I did a lot of experimentation after college and grad school, playing sort of different kinds of music. My husband is a songwriter. He's also an amazing classical bass player, but he wrote these songs, and I was like, I love those songs. I want to play on them. Can you write me out some things? And he was like, nope. So I had to think about that for a minute, and finally, I like pulling teeth. I played the one whole note, and it was horrible because it felt so bad to be improvising. And then I was like, oh, that's a whole note. I can do that. And so I started improvising with him and performing with him, and that soon led to playing more than whole notes and harmonizing and learning, the different roles of accompanying something, of playing a solo, and eventually I had a lovely conversation with Aaron Dworkin, who mentioned that Sphinx had this quartet of electric violins and nobody was using them. And I was like, any way I can have one of those? He was like, oh, let me check on it. So he loaned me this Yamaha electric violin, and all of a sudden there were pedals, and all of a sudden there was a whole nother part of experimentation. And that really freed me up as a musician. I started doing, and that had, then I was a rock star. Then I was playing with a distortion pedal, and I was, making sure that if somebody heard me on a recording, they would not know that it was a violin. They would think it was an electric guitar. And I wore that hat. And at a certain point, I got restless. And at that point, also, this really amazing group of individuals asked me to audition for them because they had lost a violinist in their string quartet. And they happened to be playing both classical music and also experimenting with improvisation. So I was like, well, that's interesting. That seems to be right up my alley. And I auditioned for them, and they liked me, and that became PUBLIQuartet, and which is a huge part of my life and career trajectory now, and has really helped me focus my musical path and what I want to do, and realize that I don't have to box myself in. I don't have to say, well, I'm only going to play classical music, or I'm only going to be rock and roll, I'm only going to do this. I get to work with all these people who allow me to be creative and play all of these different kinds of music. Getting back to branding, I tend to talk about the projects that I do, and people are like, what the hell are you talking about? Because they don't fit neatly into a little box. For instance, Sphinx gave me an Empower grant, was crazy enough to give me an Empower grant to write a rock and roll song cycle for PUBLIQuartet and HOLLANDS, which is my band, and multimedia projections. And you have no idea, we had a really amazing amount of money behind us. You have no idea how hard it was actually to sell that project, to get a performance of it. Because I would tell people, I'm writing a multimedia song cycle for rock band and string quartets based on Scheherazade. It's gonna have Rimsky-Korsakov in it. We're gonna improvise, and then, and we're gonna go in and out of the Rimsky-Korsakov, and then there's gonna be original songs, and then there's also gonna be these multimedia projections, and it's gonna have a feminist angle, and they'd be like, what are you talking about? How does this exist? And then they would see it, and they were like, wow, this is amazing. So, what I'm trying to say is that you can do all those things, and you can really reflect who you are, and just because you don't have to put it into a neat little box, but you can have snapshots of it. Just like, your Facebook photo. That's the first thing people see when they're trying to find you, when they haven't seen you since elementary school. They see that photo, but you're not committed to that photo for life, That's a snapshot of you today, and you can change it in 6 months, and you can change it in 3 months. But all the photos that you put up there, they all reflect you in some way, and they start to build a photo album of who you are. And I think that's sort of where I feel, that's your representation, and that's where you are, and that's a snapshot of your brand. And I think that you can apply that when you come to your musical and artistic life, but also to know that anything that you put forward is just one piece of the puzzle, but it's supposed to make somebody interested to come back and say, that's interesting, I want more, let me click here, okay? So I give it back to you, Lara.
Thank you. I have problems with the word brand too. I think that we all do. I hear us all kind of stumbling a little bit because we don't know where the line is. When we were backstage, I said, well, there's just been this talk about career building and career development. Let's not talk about that too much. Let's talk about the branding of it. But it's really all the same thing. And I hear us all sort of struggling with that a little bit, and I know that you are too. We want to leave a lot of time for questions, by the way. But I also am hearing us talk a lot about evolution, and I love the way that you just put it in terms of that social media thing where you get to change your mind. I think that this knowing of yourself changes all the time, and that's such an empowering thing. So the thing is that yes, we do have to define ourselves. I mean, we do have to sort of present ourselves and define ourselves, and it's so hard to do that for yourself. I find that the more I know about a project or a passion, the harder it is to explain it to anyone else, right? Because it's so deep in your head and in your heart. So I think that we have such an opportunity now to put all these different platforms together and kind of tell a story on many levels. I mean, we use social media, we use different social media platforms for different things. And I think that they have different kinds of value. I think that the assignment of, reducing any thought into a tweet is kind of an interesting one. It's an interesting challenge. I think that choosing that photo that you want to, portray you that day or that week or that month is something else. It's the thought process. And putting all of these assets together, I think that the way that the world sees us is in a composite of everything we put out. So when you're talking about, defining a logo or something, all those things are important. I think in the big corporate world, those things come with a lot of thought and effort and money behind them, and they shift too. I mean, we may not be aware of it, but Apple is always refining, right, and tweaking. And so I think that that's just really part of the exciting journey. I did ask everybody to give a little bit of thought, just before we came out. This idea of the refining and the reducing and sort of the elevator pitch has always been, to me, a really tough one. And so I thought that we could play a little game, which you're invited to play in your heads or at the mic during the question time. 3 little words that you would use to define your brand, yourself, your work.
Passion, authenticity, fun.
Well, it made me think about all of besides Flutronix, the other projects and work that I tend to take. Like Jannina, it's really important to me to show the flute doing things that people don't normally associate it with or wouldn't automatically envision the flute doing. And there's a lot of stereotypes out there about the flute, and I'm trying to show hey, it's so much more than that. So I involve myself in a lot of different projects other than playing in orchestra or something like that. I've played with singer-songwriters. I've done a lot of session work, playing with recording artists, things like that. So it's a mixed bag. So I would say for me, and my husband has kind of said this too, that what I'm doing is democratizing the flute. Okay, just trying to make it a little bit more of a universal
That is so much
thing.
more than 3 words.
Oh, I'm sorry. Well, okay, democratizing the flute. Sorry, I wanted to lead into it.
Okay.
But there you go. Those are the three words.
They are. They happen to be 3 words.
I can't really top that explanation, but creative, unexpected, and expressive.
Great. So mine, I'm going to cheat a little bit because one of mine is 2, and one of them is, actually 2 of them are stolen or borrowed. The one that's all me, I think, is open. I just am, and in everything I do. The one that is borrowed or stolen and is also actually 2 words comes from Duke Ellington, Beyond Category, which is pretty much at the heart of everything that I try to do musically, personally, the way I interact with people, and the work that I put out into the world. And the 3rd word is stolen from a New Yorker profile a couple of weeks ago because I read the word and I realized that I needed to look it up. It has so many layers, and then I realized that it's like the perfect word for me, and I love it. They called me iconoclastic, and that is a complicated word. It kind of has like this slightly violent connotation to it, just sort of smashing down of things, but also exploring widely. And I think that, that is what I am in my music, in my life. So let's take questions because I really want to hear everything that you have to say. There are mics on the side, and we need you to come to the mics for questions. Hi.
Okay, my name's India, and sorry, I wrote my question down. Okay, so when in the process of building your brand, how do you set a boundary that helps your brand ethically that doesn't bend your personal morals or make you stand out and seem like, oh, this is that specific minority, back at it again?
I feel like every question probably that we're going to tackle comes down to authenticity for me.
Yeah.
And I had a lunch conversation today about this, about, what if my project is connected to current events, or it's sort of political, or it seems kind of timely, and then that makes me feel like I'm capitalizing on something. And I think that, it's a really simple line, and it comes down to instinct. If it feels real, it is real. You know when you're manufacturing something. You know when you're trying to think of something that is, going to help you book a gig, or just, get positioned for something. I think that you really have to trust your instincts when it comes to that.
Yeah. And I think it's that leads me to think the importance of avoiding gimmicks, because they're very transparent. And I think sometimes with that overthinking of like, okay, well, I want to be cool and I want to be able to sell this, so I'm going to do this thing that's really cool right now, but it's not really who you are. People are going to see through that. So just, to kind of emphasize the point of just really kind of like, it's brave to put yourself out there and be honest, but I think that's really the key to all of this, for sure.
I would also say, ask yourself a ton of questions. Think about the questions that somebody else might ask you, and ask yourself all those questions. Ask yourself, what do I really want to say? What image am I trying to project? What's important to me, about what I'm putting across, and especially if you're, it sounded like maybe there was something controversial attached to it. If there's something controversial attached to it, prepare yourself for the fact that you might ruffle some feathers, and ask yourself, am I prepared for that? And am I ready to stand behind it? Because there's also, my quartet is actually, we're doing our first social justice project that is a piece that deals with oppression, and it deals with race, and it takes many protest songs, and we play them and improvise on them, and it questions ownership of yourself and ownership in the history of America, and in the process of it, it's not my concept, it's actually our cellist Amanda. We had to ask ourselves all of those questions, and the answer was different for each one of us, and we had to come up with reasons together, because in our group we have many different races, and so if you are a white person in that group, how are you representing strange fruit? How are you representing somebody else's struggle? So are you supporting someone's struggle when you're playing a piece like that? Or are you telling your own story or your family's story? So we had to ask ourselves those questions, and then we also had to prepare ourselves for the audience's reaction to that when we played it, and realize that some people might be uncomfortable with it. But, if you want to make people uncomfortable and you want to make people think, that's a choice, of your brand. That's a choice of what you want to put out and be who you are. But you have to sort of prepare yourself so that you can be ready for it,
Hello, my name's, wow, this is loud. Okay. My name's Uli, and wow, this thing is low. Okay.
You're good.
I don't know how to do that. Okay. Okay.
Oh, no.
Hello. Howdy.
Don't laugh at you.
Okay. So my name is Uli, and I have a question about the broadness of branding and stuff. So, for instance, I do martial arts, and I won a competition for a martial art that I created, and they didn't know that at the time, and that could have led me into working with Red Bull. But I wanted to still do all my classical music and all that stuff. So what I've found out is that I would love to take the martial arts that I created and do fire dance and martial arts, and then do that over classical music that's cultural to different cultures and stuff. So kind of mix that all up together. Explaining that doesn't make any sense, and it doesn't make sense when you try to put that together. try to understand how to make that like a branding. How do you like take they're really rare and not rare, random. They're really random. How do you put the random together?
That sounds awesome.
Yeah, that sounds very cool.
That sounds like it works.
I really want to
Yeah.
see that.
We want to see that
great.
too.
So that's
Just do
great.
it.
Yeah, it's okay.
Yeah, that to me
do
sounds
it.
like an example of show not tell, right? That means that your
Right.
platform is a visual platform.
Yeah.
Don't write about it, just do it and
Do it.
let people see it.
There you go.
Well, you can give advice about YouTube. You're the YouTube guy.
Oh yeah. When it comes to YouTube, make sure that you storyboard everything. Make sure you have a clear vision of what you want before you ever put that out there. And make sure, like, your idea is so dope. Like, I don't think anybody else is trying to do that right now. So you have the niche, you have the space in the market, but you have to make sure that, especially the music that's associated with the dance or with the martial art, it makes a lot of sense. You get the right people to make that music, or you make it yourself, and then you find somebody. You either spend some time to learn how to do the correct videography to make it high quality, or you delegate that and hire people to do that. But beyond that, you have the concept, and it makes sense. And honestly, what's more valuable than that is just doing it and then hearing the feedback. Because the feedback helps you guide where you need to go. And if it's, oh, I need to turn a little bit to the left, that's fine. And then you do that, and then that's a sweet spot. So just do it.
Hi, my name is Christian Stargell. When some of you were speaking, you talked about feelings of like restlessness or complacency being a catalyst for you going through a period of growth or changing or rediscovering or discovering something new about yourself. I've been in that place myself where it either feels like I'm plateauing a little bit or I'm not really happy or fulfilled with some of the things that I'm doing. What are some of your ways of managing those feelings and making sure that you use those constructively to lead you to a better place rather than letting it sort of stall or plateau or hold your career back when you do feel that way?
Wow. I guess, yeah, I mean, we've all kind of had these crossroads in our lives, in the development of our career. I definitely went through that when I graduated from my undergrad. I didn't know what I was doing. You know, it's like, well, I've been playing the flute at this really high level and you know, trying to start different projects and do different things that were all very like classically focused. And I gave myself time to really think about where I saw myself in the future, what my long-term goals were, the type of art making that makes me most happy. And it took a while. I didn't go straight into graduate school like a lot of music students do, because I had this dilemma. You know, I was like, I don't know if I just want to go straight in and just get another performance degree and just do that and, you know, go through this routine, because I was confused about my end game. So I gave myself some time. And it was very scary. I'm going to be completely transparent. It was very scary. I had a lot of teachers that didn't understand why I was doing that. A lot of people who cared about me, they were like, oh God, what's going on with her? You know, and they were worried about me because they cared about me, and I appreciated that. But it was nerve-wracking because I just wasn't sure. But I knew I wanted to do something a little bit more or something else. I've always had that spirit of like creating projects and kind of just going for different things. And so I gave myself time to like really think about it, and I kind of created like long, midterm, and short-term goals and worked backwards from there. That was very helpful because it helped kind of architect a trajectory a little bit. So I would suggest giving yourself some time. You know, if you find yourself in a rut, and asking yourself those honest questions and thinking about what it is that does fulfill you and does make you happy, and how you can make that a bigger part of your endeavors.
You know, I just want to say classical music is such a weird profession. We do what we do literally our whole lives. And so that is such a burden in a way. We've been doing what we do since we were 4 or 5 years old. Most people don't have to understand a lot of things about themselves, in terms of profession, career, goals until much later in life. So I think that we get like a credit in the bank of reinvention and time to assess and time to breathe. There are going to be all these markers along the way where the reasons that we've been, the things that have been driving us, the things that have been defining us, our brand changes, and it takes a moment to reset and grab that. But I just think about that all the time, because when I'm talking to really young people, to kids, about a life in music, and I look ahead through their eyes and I think how long it is, what a long winding path, and that's very, very unique to this life.
I would also go back to what Drew said that I love so much, to failing forward, and know that your career is a long-term thing, and finding equilibrium in your career, it takes your life, and you're going to have high moments and low moments, and sometimes your low moments are like 3 years long, but that's a very little, that in the grand spectrum, that's not a long time, and that also educates you and gives you inspiration to make art later, and right now you can't envision where you are going to be in a year, in a month, in 5 years. We set goals for that. We set goals to motivate us and help drive us towards them, but you can't predict the future. And so living in the moment and accepting an uncomfortable moment as something to propel you and motivate you towards the future, accepting that uncomfortable place can help you find yourself, as uncomfortable as it may be, I think will help you just recognizing that fact and knowing that you can continue your search and you'll get there,
So I'm seeing that we're under 3 minutes, so we should take as many questions as we can in that time.
Lightning round.
Hi, thank you for your very inspirational and thought-provoking talk. I'm thoroughly enjoying it. My basic understanding of branding is that you have a thing that you do, and then you figure out a way to put it into a format that people then can see. So a lot of us are musicians. The thing that we do is we make music in various ways, and the branding is how do we want it to actually look on our website, our business card, whatever. We've talked a lot about how to find the thing that we do, like that's the first step. I'm wondering if you can share some thoughts on specifically what you do to translate the thing that you do into a visual product or a website or any kind of medium that you're then selling your product on, like specifically from your own personal standpoint. Thank you.
Sure. So with each project that I'm involved in, I believe it's very important to be very consistent in the look and in the messaging. So for example, with Flutronix, all of our logos, they're either black or pink. And our newsletters, we use related colors. So there's always, that consistency of that kind of like pop, colorful thing going on. It's changed a little bit throughout the years, but very little, it's pretty consistent. Our website is the same deal. The design is very like simple and clean, and colors can pop out, and that kind of fun spirit that we want to project. And if you guys want, you can check it out at flutronix.com while I'm talking about it. As far as our photos were concerned, the very first photos we put out, we had to try to represent all the things that we do, right, in like one quick shot. So we had ourselves, we wore things that we would normally wear like in concert, so it was true to like who we are. We had our flutes, okay, that kind of speaks for itself, and we had an amp in there with cables. So that was the first one of our first concepts of our shoot to kind of represent the electronic aspect. And then the next time around, it was a little bit more colorful, but consistent in that, you know, we had our flutes, we had our own style, you know, going on, and we had a boombox in that one. So that was kind of like representing the pop feel in some of our music and the electronic component. So the concepts are just trying to quickly just represent the little things that make your project. And for myself individually on my website, like I was saying before, like I don't have your, you know, standard headshot thing with the ball gown, because that's not who I am. That's not what I do. I have one that's a little bit more formal for the more kind of like classically more traditional oriented work that I'm involved in. But it's still me, right? So I think everything keeps coming back to this whole like authenticity thing. It's so, I mean, that's so key. And then I have another one that's a little bit more casual and commercial looking for some of the commercial work that I do, or like, you know, downtown music kind of thing versus uptown. So that's how I specifically have tried to do things. I'm also, real quickly, I'm producing a new project that's involving women composers who are all mothers. And we're exploring themes of being a mother and an artist. So I'm starting to put the imaging out there. And the one image that I use is an old picture I took with myself and my daughter on the keyboard. And it's just like our hands are on the keyboard. And that's a real authentic moment that my daughter and I had. But to me, I felt like, and I showed it around, you should show your stuff around to people. I thought it accurately represented this idea of being a mom and an artist, like very succinctly.
And see, my one rule is that as a pianist, I never have a piano in the photo, because I just frankly hate that thing where you have to like lean awkwardly on the piano or do weird things with the piano. So there you go, counterintuitive. Are we out of time? Do we need to stop? Okay, so we're really happy to talk to everybody one-on-one, and thank you so much for being here. I know it's been a long day. It was great to share some ideas.
Thank you.